Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jean. Okay, so today we're going to talk about what makes native gardening special. And what we're going to talk about is why we would garden and why we do garden with native plants. And then we're going to talk about our local habitat and our local native plant communities and what we learned from them that informs what makes gardening with native plants different and how knowing about those can help us garden with native plants. And then we're going to talk about designing with native plants and how knowing about our local habitats and our local plant communities can help us design better and have more success with gardening with native plants. And then we're going to talk about how planting and establishing natives is different from, has a few special aspects relative to gardening with non-natives. So why garden with native plants? Everything in this presentation I've learned since joining Redbud. I've been a gardener for decades, but I came to native gardening when we bought our property in Nevada County in 2006. As a member of Redbud, I've observed a great diversity in why people garden with natives. I've gained additional understandings of these special benefits over the years. So the reason that I started out gardening with natives, I still understand, but I've gained additional understanding over the years. So I wanted to start this session by reflecting for a moment on ourselves as gardeners of native plants. Why do you garden with natives? You know, what inspires or drives or informs you most in your desire, your dedication to gardening with natives? Or if you're just starting out, you know, what informs your plan to garden with natives? Come on. There we go. So quickly, in Zoom chat, you can see a little button at the bottom. If you go to the bottom, you'll see a button that says chat. If you don't have chat already open on the right, why do you garden with natives? Just enter, you know, what comes to mind. Oh, it brings in the birds. I love gardens that are thriving to attract pollinators. I want to feel connected to California. Yes, it was pre-Spanish. Yes, low water usage. They care for themselves. Water conservation. These are terrific reasons, absolutely. And they span a great breadth of the reasons why we garden with natives. Oh, yes. And as Jenny says, easier to go with the flow than to try to pull the weeds. And they are beautiful. That's an interesting idea. Absolutely. And as Kim says, to attract butterflies and bees. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. So, first of all, as someone mentioned, most natives use less water. They're adapted to our summer dry, winter wet climate. And they become more drought tolerant. They become drought tolerant as they mature. Not those little 4-inch plants that you buy, not the 1-gallon plants when you just put them in, but you know, by the time they're 2 years old, you know, so take care of them when they're little and they will love you when they're mature. The goldenrod and the coffee berry that you see here, which are in my garden, they require absolutely no supplemental water at any time. It's fabulous. Sorry. Okay. And I missed a couple. There are just, sorry, I'm having trouble with the advance. Okay, there we go. Okay, they're often easier. And, you know, gardening with natives is easier often because the local natives are already well adapted to our climate and our soil And so natives often require less maintenance than non-natives. If you want to find out what particular native plants are easy, you can go to calscape.org, and we'll talk about Calscape, and there's a handout for this of resources, and Calscape is listed there. It's run by CNPS. You can put in, if you want to find out easy natives that are local to your address, you put in your address, and it produces a list of all the native plants that are local to your address. And one of the categories is easy natives. It's fabulous. So get started with those, and then branch out as you become more adventurous. Local natives may also be more likely to succeed in your garden than non-natives because they don't need fertilizer. They slowly get the minerals that they need from the soil because the roots of the natives have a symbiotic relationship with soil fungi, the mycorrhizae. So what happens is that the native plants do photosynthesis, and so they get energy, which are the sugars, and they exchange those with the mycorrhizae, and then the mycorrhizae are slowly breaking down the soil into its mineral components, and they exchange those mineral components for the sugars. It's a very wonderful symbiotic relationship. So they don't need the minerals from the fertilizer. And in fact, that excess nitrogen can harm the native plants. Over time, it decreases species diversity, and it can reduce the diversity and the abundance of the soil microbial communities. And that in turn weakens the plant microbe interactions, and it reduces the life of the plants. So the natives, as someone said, they benefit the wildlife in so many ways. Look at all the kinds of food that wildlife get from native plants: pollen, nectar, berries, seeds, nuts, foliage. They even get insects, and the insects are very important. They come to the native plants, and small flora, small fauna eat the insects, larger fauna eat the smaller fauna. It's a great ecosystem, all starting with the native plants. So the native plants also provide a cover. This is the second basic element that the wildlife need: the cover to hide from the predators and to shelter from the elements. They get that from the plants. They also get nesting material. The birds certainly get this, but other kinds of animals get it too for their young. And they get nesting sites safe from the predators. This could be tree branches, brush piles, hollows in trees. And so all they need is water. And the water, it is also more prevalent when the plants are there holding water in the soil. So the water is there also in the drier seasons. In particular, the birds thrive when you're gardening with natives. There's recent groundbreaking work by Doug Tallamy and his graduate students at the University of Delaware and the Smithsonian Institution. And they found that the extent of the non-native plants in backyard gardens endangers insect-eating birds, which is over a third of the US native species, but it also meant that it endangered non-insect eating birds because almost all birds feed insects to their young, because the insects are so high in protein, and also because they're much easier for the young of all bird species to eat. So what happens, what they discovered is that if in backyards that had less than 70% natives by biomass, the chickadees, which they were studying, did not survive to renew their population. But if there were 70% or more natives by biomass, the chickadees survived. So now we have a number. That means you don't have to say, oh, they're all saying I have to be 100% native. That's not the message. The message is we now have a number, 70%. So if there are some plants that you dearly love or already have and want to keep that are Mediterranean or not local, or somehow, don't fall in the native category or the local native category, that's okay, but aim for at least 70% over time. Now you have something to shoot for. And as we've said, the natives help the ecosystem. Many pollinators lay eggs only on the host native plants with which they co-evolved. If those plants are not there in sufficient number, their larvae, when they hatch, they don't have enough leaves around to eat to survive. So there are too few larvae that grow to maturity. And the larvae get eaten by insects. So there's some predation. So they need to have lots of leaves of the host species so that even though some larvae hatch, enough larvae survive. So we need to have plentiful supplies of those host native plants. And if the natives are depleted, the ecosystem that depends on the larvae that the insects depend on and the fauna depend on the insects, it all weakens. So we need to have a plentiful supply of the host native plants for the whole ecosystem to work right. And we get a sense of place when we are surrounded by natives. We know where we are in California when we look around and we see locally native plants. We know we are in this part of California. We know that we are connecting with nature. We feel it around us. And we look around and we know we're not in downtown Grass Valley. We're out, in our little piece of the country, our little piece of nature. We are apart from human intervention, and it feeds our souls. So, okay, we're going to focus on now the more common habitats and plant communities in Nevada and Placer counties. And there is information on less common habitats. You can find that in either of our 2 Redbud books, which are listed in the resources handbooks. It's Wildflowers of Nevada and Placer counties and Trees and Shrubs of Nevada and Placer counties. Fabulous books for learning more about almost all of the plants that we're talking about today. So, okay, what are habitat? Habitat is where you are, where the plants are. This means the elevation where you are, where those plants are. It means, and by that, here we mean the elevation range in Nevada and Placer counties, because elevation range and its significance varies by latitude. So when we say 2,000 feet, we mean 2,000 feet at this latitude, not 2,000 feet in Washington State or in Alaska or in Mexico or in someplace else. And habitat means the environmental situation. It means, what are the soils like? Learn about your habitat. Learn how fast or slow your soil drains. Dig a hole, fill it with water, see how long it takes to empty. There's some detail in the do-it-yourself link in the handout. There's a handout that's separate from the resources, but resources list. That is the resources list. There's that link there. And you might want to do a soils test. And that will tell you about the minerals in your soil. Could be very important if you think you might have a minerals imbalance. And you want to check the pockets of the sun throughout the year. What's your orientation? Does that piece of land face south, face north? Is it shaded by trees? When does it get sun? Really important to know that, to know what plants are going to be happy there. And then look at the dominant plant species, because that can be a really big clue to the kind of habitat you're looking at if you're trying to figure that out. It's really important to, if you're trying to grow native plants successfully, right plant, right place, which is a motto among the master gardeners. It works best when you go with the habitat, go with the habitat rather than fighting it. So start with knowing the habitat. So the common local habitats, which we're going to go over, are grasslands, chaparral, foothill woodland, lower conifer forest, and riparian. These and other habitats are detailed in Redbud's 2 books. The grasslands. Grasslands grow at almost all the elevations in our counties. The soil is generally rich soil. This is great soil for growing plants. The water drains pretty slowly, so you need to plant here only plants that are comfortable with that. And it gets full sun, except under the scattered oaks. And the grasses are the dominant plant type. Most grasses now are non-native. It can be a sea of wildflowers in the spring in the right circumstances. If there's grazing that's withheld, if there's no human disturbance. But these grasslands are under the gravest threat from development of any of the habitats in our counties because they're already flat, because there are already few trees. That's generally too dry for trees, except near the water or along the few rocky ridges. Chaparral. So chaparral, I think you all, at least informally, if not formally, recognize the chaparral. It grows a little bit higher than just on the valley floor, 500 to 3,000 feet. The soil is not very rich, but it could be rocky, sandy, gravelly. Often chaparral have slope to them. So between the soil type and the slope, chaparral plants need really good drainage. This is what they're looking for. And it tends to be pretty dry. So again, not much water for these plants once they get themselves established. And full sun on the chaparral. Trees are not really a factor here in the chaparral. The Manzanita, the Buckbrush, Cnose, these are often the dominant plants. And it's pretty dense in there. There's a different chaparral type above 4,000 feet, but we're going to concentrate on this lower type. The foothill woodland. So this is a more narrow band than the first two, from 500 to 2,000 feet. It generally also has really good soil. And the dominant plant type is a hardwood deciduous tree, some kind of an oak. Different oaks may predominate. Could be an interior live oak. It could be a blue oak. It could be a black oak. Unlikely, but it's possible. And it depends on the elevation, the water, the exposure. They also have gray pines, the Pinus sabiniana. The lower conifer forest, 2,000 to 6,000 feet, so somewhat higher. Of course, the soil is going to be acidic from all those pine trees. It has a mixture of shady and open spots, and it also can be a place where, the ponderosa pine, the Doug fir are the common plants, but there are several varieties of pine that you may find in there. Riparian, as the name suggests, of course, this habitat happens where there's water. It happens at the edges of streams, the edges of lakes. And this can happen within any of the other habitats. It's, so where is there a stream? It can happen, inside that lower conifer forest, inside that grassland. Where does the stream run? Where do you find the lake? Anywhere there is that, there can be the riparian habitat. And where you're going to find that, you're also going to see the dominant trees are going to be those water-loving trees, the willows, the dogwoods, the maples. You really should be growing those trees where they're going to have lots of water. Okay, so now we're going to do something new and different. There's going to be a Zoom poll. Oh, there it is. Thank you very much, Shane. Okay, so in this Zoom poll, choose the habitat or habitats where you're going to be gardening, and we're going to see what kind of results we get. I'm just curious, and I think we'll all be curious. Just pick one or more of these habitats. And see what you can do. And now we're going to wait just another minute while everybody makes choices. Yeah, and then that's right. And yeah, someone did exactly what I was hoping they would do, and that is to put into chat some other result. And then we have our responses here, and our responses are, okay, it's still happening. Okay, and it's almost a tie for first place, so to speak, between the Chaparral and the Foothill Woodland. Oh, Foothill Woodland is taking a slight lead at 34%, but Chaparral is not far behind at 31. Grasslands 24, still, the lower conifer at 17, and the riparian at 10%. And then the other is 21%. Well, let's see if we can bring that up. I'm going to try to get over to chat. Over here. Can I bring up chat over here? Can I bring? There's chat. Okay, what do we got here? Okay. Yes. Urban man-made ecosystems. Oh, yes. Okay. High desert, urban. Okay, same thing there. Probably at some point grassland or riparian bottomland forest, but it's been a suburb. Okay, that's probably the same thing as the first two. Grasslands and foothill woodland. Yes, mixed conifer. Okay. So yeah, I think the question of what do you do when you already have something that's urban is a really interesting challenge. That book that I first recommended gives some very interesting ideas on if you're just making something, what to do. But I still think, if you start with the idea of the where in the habitat, that really gives you an idea of, you're starting with what's the elevation, you're starting with what's the soil, you're starting with what's the aspect. You may not see it around you, but you still have some ideas that are going to help you be able to succeed with native plant gardening by making informed choices, so you'll know where you are. Thank you so much for playing. So now we're going to talk about plant communities. Well, wait a minute. If we just talked about habitat and now we're talking about plant communities, what's the difference? And I will tell you, I was confused. So I think I can now share with you my understanding of the difference. So the habitat, and I tried to do this in these slides. So the habitat is the where. It's what's the elevation? What's the soil like? What's the how much water does it naturally get? What's the aspect, like what direction does it face? Though that's the where. The plant community is the what. So the what is based on that habitat in this place. What species grow together in that place? And so this means, based on a quote from UC Davis, thank you very much, an association of plant species that is similar wherever that habitat repeats. So what this means is that there's that habitat, and here's the plant, here are the plants that grow together where that habitat is exactly the same. So that habitat here is different from that habitat 200 miles from here or 400 miles from here. There's a plant community here where I live that is somewhat different from where somebody lives who lives at 4,000 feet, who may also live in a yellow pine forest, because my elevation is different. I'm at 2,300. So my plant community is going to be somewhat different because my climate is, pardon me, my climate is somewhat different. And because the aspect that my landscape has, what direction it faces in terms of the sun, is going to be somewhat different. And my soil is going to be a little bit different. So the habitat is going to be a little bit different. So, but if I had exactly the same place, my neighbors, or, Nancy Gilbert, who lives, 10 miles down the road, but her place is shadier. But if we had a place that was exactly the same, we have a lot of overlap in terms of plant community. Okay. And a plant community has a characteristic vertical architecture. What does that mean? It means there are different layers of plants that grow at different heights that grow in that plant community. And they are called an overstory, a midstory, and an understory. So an overstory, it's the trees. The midstory, it's the shrubs. And the understory, it's the ground level plants. To do a complete oversimplification, of course. And you could say there are many layers in an overstory if you were being very professional about it, but we'll just say these basic three. And not every plant community has every one of those stories, but we'll think about it that way. But it's characteristic to the plant community which of those elements of the vertical architecture it would have. And a plant community is generally named in relation to its dominant or characteristic species. I'm having a little trouble with advancing, so I've just tried different things along the way. Bear with me. Okay, so what are the benefits of gardening with plant communities? Why do we pay attention to this? And I will tell you, I have loved finding out about this when I discovered it, which was fairly early on, though I had a very limited understanding of it. And here's how it goes. In plant communities, the species in that plant community have similar needs related to soil, to water, to temperature range, to wind exposure. So if you plant plants in the same area that are part of the same plant community, those plants, and you treat them using the same water regimen, they're all facing the same aspect, they're all planted in the same soil, they're much more likely to survive than if you stick in a plant that doesn't belong in that plant community. You're going to have a better success rate. And also, particularly species support one another. We're going to talk about how, you'll see as we talk about plants, some plants are hemiparasitic. One plant really kind of says, I'm going to succeed better if I'm with this other plant. And sometimes two plants will be mutually beneficial. So they're going to support each other. Also, species that are part of the same plant community often will need and benefit from the same species of mycorrhizae, those teeny tiny little fungi that grow in the soil. There are many different species of mycorrhizae, something else I didn't know when I started on this journey, but there are. And though, yes, mycorrhizae are great, the mycorrhizae from one plant community, from one kind of habitat, doesn't benefit these plants. They need their own special kind. So and once they get going with members of this plant community, if there are other members of the same plant community there, they're going to benefit. Plants in the same plant community support related wildlife. So again, you're benefiting the ecosystem, and that biodiversity is supported. And you gain a sense of place because you look around and you see how those plants fit together. You have that vertical architecture. You have a sense that you've seen these plants together out in nature, and now you see them in your own landscape. It's a very rewarding experience. And you're working with, rather than struggling against, nature. What was this land like before human habitation, before land and pasture, before land development and pastures and everything that gets in the way now? You're going to have that sense. So the common local plant communities are oaks that we're going to talk about today, but these are the most common: oak savanna, chaparral, oak woodland, yellow pine forest, and foothill riparian. These and other plant communities are detailed in Designing California Native Gardens. This is a fabulous book. This is a great book for everyone. It's listed in the handbook. Also, and I think I skipped ahead on this, this is a great book for those people who have those urban gardens who are like, oh, you know, what am I going to do? I don't live in the country. This is a great book for you because it does not presume that you live in the country. You'll love it. Come on. So the oak savanna plant community. Oh, the overstory is, of course, you know, the big oaks. And pardon me. Yeah, okay. So an oak savanna is a grassland dotted with widely spaced trees. And the local oak savannas, they may have blue oaks, valley oaks, or interior live oaks. Those are the most likely oaks to see. And the blue oaks, they grow to 20 to 80 feet high, 20 to 60 feet high. The interior live oaks, they may get a bit larger, but those valley oaks, they can grow to 100 feet high. The blue oaks are the most intolerant of summer water. So be really, really careful if you happen to have those. When the weather gets hottest, they're most likely to lose their leaves because that's a way that they save the water that they do have for their essential survival. And the valley oak is more forgiving of summer water. Now, in the savanna, there are over 50 grasses native to our two counties, and most of these are grassland species. So we're going to look at a couple of the most common. One of them is this purple needlegrass, which many of you know is our state grass. This photo from Nancy Gilbert, really you can see here why it's called the purple needlegrass. The purple needlegrass I grew never looked this purple, so I just treasure this photo. You can also see that this purple needlegrass has these long awns, and these are pokey and can bother dogs, which is something that if you have dogs, you have to watch out for. They're not as bad as foxtails because they last only, a month or so. They fall to the ground and then they're not problematic again. They shatter and fall off. So then they're harmless. This grass, it's great for restoration work and it's great for erosion control. And that's true of many grasses that are helpful in this way because they have native grasses, because they have roots that go down 12 inches or more. So grasses that grow under oaks, they often grow taller and faster and in greater numbers than the grasses that grow out in the open areas. They also stay green longer in the spring because the roots of the oaks go way, way down and bring water up, which helps provide water to the grasses longer in the spring. Another prominent native grass is the California fescue. It's a tall grass, so use it where it won't overshadow little perennials that you might plant. It's happiest where it gets just a little bit of dapple shade, so see if you can provide that. You know, it might be from those little native oaks, giant native oaks, pardon me. Okay, so the understory of the oak savanna plant community, it can be a gorgeous place in the spring because there are dozens of annual species that you can have there. This is just a small sampling. This is the foothill poppy in the orange, the purple owl's clover in the magenta, and the sky lupin in the purple and white. These are, and then there are others too. There's the baby blue eyes and the common media and several species of fiddleneck. These are all mentioned in a handout that I have in the same place called Local Native Plants for Local Plant Communities. So you don't have to worry about writing everything down. It's all in one handout. You can relax and just look at it and listen. So the purple owl's clover, the magenta one, is an example of a hemiparasite, which means that it takes some of its nutrients from other plants. So even though it's seen here just with other annuals, it's more often planted with a perennial, which could be like a native grass or some flowering shrub. And, you know, it doesn't generally damage the other plant. It just, you know, takes a little. Oh, and the purple owl's clover is not a clover. See how its botanical name is Castanea? Okay, so that puts it in the same genus as the paintbrush, which we will see later. And the oak savanna also can feature several bulb species, and these are some of our more prevalent local natives. The yellow is the pretty face, the white is the paper onion, and the lavender is the blue dix. These are all in the realm of the easier species to grow. The bulbs provide an array of colors on a perennial basis, which is really lovely. We should all keep in mind that unlike the annuals, the bulbs do not bloom their first year. It takes them at least a year to build up enough energy that they can produce flowers. So don't worry about writing these down. All these species and more will be listed in that handout, Local Plants for Local Plant Communities, and we'll try to get the link up for that in chat during the program. So the Chaparral plant community. A lot of you said you lived in the chaparral, in the chaparral habitat. So this is likely to be, you know, you'll choose plants from within the chaparral plant community. So chaparral shrubs have tough leaves, often on the small side. And these plants they're drought tolerant, and they generally have both the long taproot, so they can access water deep underground, as well as shallow roots that can take immediate advantage of rainfall. Chaparral plants are quite fire adapted. And that is that they need fire. Many species require fire or the chemicals from smoke in order for their seeds to germinate. I mean, how amazing is that? So note the roundish leaves of this Indian Manzanita, and it has relatively large, dark mahogany colored berries. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of those. So depending on where you live, there are other Manzanita that are common, including the white-leaf Manzanita, which we'll see later. The Manzanita, which we just saw, and this chaparral, the buckbrush, the Cnose cuneatus, these are the dominant species overall in the chaparral. And then there are many chaparral species that bloom prolifically and are quite colorful in the spring. So you can make a gorgeous chaparral plant community. Most Cnose species, this is another, how do the plants work together story. Most Cnose species fix nitrogen via a type of bacteria, which I cannot pronounce, Actinomycetes, sorry about that. That bacteria is on their roots, and then that nitrogen becomes available for other plants in that plant community, and that's part of their role. Another quite common plant community member around here is the Toyon. We've all seen this. We see it in the spring with its berries like this, and then in the in the fall and in the winter, their berries turn red and then turn black. They're just beautiful and provide so much food for the birds. So this is a wonderful, wonderful habitat plant. If you have native chaparral, observing the level of diversity can tell you about the soil. If it has just a few species, that soil is relatively shallow, rocky, and poor. Greater plant diversity means richer soil, or it's more recently burned, or there's a multiplicity of topographies. So you're getting, one variety of plant community over here and a slightly different plant community over there. To just return to the Toyon just for a moment, if it's burned, it often resprouts, and that's typical of many chaparral plants. There are plants in this community, they're adapted, so they proliferate after wildfires that would naturally occur in 20 to 40-year cycles. So, that's what they're used to. We just have houses in between now. One other mid-story plant that is often found in our landscapes is the California Flannel Bush, the Freemontodendron californica. Gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous when it blooms. If you're looking for an example of this, in about May, go to the entrance to the Master Gardener demo garden on West Main at the end of Grass Valley, and there's a huge, huge flannel bush. This plant needs good drainage, and we'll talk about its specialized watering regime a little bit later. I will say it can be picky. I've already killed 2, well, maybe 3. Well, one lived for 12 years, or 14 years. So the 2 I killed right off. But the hybrids are somewhat easier to grow. So if you're going to say, okay, I'm going to bend just a little bit, this would be a place I'd recommend that you might want to think about it. I just want to say about the Freemontodendron that the flowers and the seed pods have these irritating hairs on them. So be sure to locate this plant someplace where no one is going to brush up against it. So not in the patio, not near a path, and be sure to be fully covered when you go to do any work on this plant. The Yerba Santa has these lovely purple flowers. It's hard to find it for sale. So, if you think you'd be interested in it, just put it on your mental list for someday when I find this. If I have a chaparral plant community going in my yard, someday if I found this plant for sale, I'm going to buy it right then. It's traditionally a medicinal plant and has many eco-botanical uses. The milkweeds are a lovely understory plant in the chaparral plant community, and also in most of the other plant communities locally. There are 3 milkweeds local to Placer County and 4 local to Nevada County. Several are listed on that handout. They're all pollinator plants for monarchs. And this one spreads by rhizomes as well as by wind-blown seeds. And I can tell you it does extremely well in the chaparral plant community. I have had great luck just based on one plant. I now have quite a few. The Sonoma Sage is a wonderful understory plant. It favors dry slopes, ideally in the understory of larger chaparral plants, but I also have it growing out in full sun and it does absolutely fine. And as you can see from this plant, from this example, the bees adore this plant. And the finches love the seeds and the butterflies love it too. So if you want pollinators, get this plant. It's easier to find the bee's bliss variety than to find a straight species. But if you live in a rural area where this plant would be out in your neighboring wild area, I would recommend trying to find a local variety if you can, straight species. Oh, sorry. Here is the our one local low chaparral paintbrush. There are more in the higher elevations. The paintbrush is another hemiparasite. So it produces its own food through photosynthesis, but it still gets food from other plants. So it's kind of like hedging its bets, you know? It's like, so it gets some more from the other shrubs so that it gets a little bit more water, gets a little bit more nutrients, so it's more likely to survive in hard times. But it doesn't take enough that the other plants do more than get stressed. They don't die. It's okay. It's not going to bite the hand that feeds it. It's all worked out through evolution. So nicely done. So here are, just to show you, as you'll see on the handout, so many more chaparral plants to choose from. So I just wanted you to see this so you could see that, you know, you're going to be able to choose chaparral plants that are right for your site, for the way that you want to design. You know, you can get more that are larger, more that are smaller, different flowering colors. You can have a lovely time designing your chaparral plant community. The woodland plant community. Oh, it's so beautiful, you know. It's, as I say, you know, light-filled open stands of trees, carpeted by sweeps of native bunch grasses, studded with colorful spring flowers. That's it. Ideally, pre-contact. You know, it was primarily bunch grasses with rich in geophytes, meaning, you know, bulbs and corms, and herbaceous perennials when low intensity fires were common. Now, it's more likely non-native grasses. We have all seen that this is what we're facing. So we need to do some restorative work in our own personal oak woodland plant communities, don't we? Yes, we do. But this is an opportunity. We can make them look more gorgeous if we have them. So what do we do for the overstories? Well, first we try to take care of the trees we have, okay? You know, your oak woodland may have blue oaks, black oaks, interior live oaks, valley oaks, and here it is, you know, open. The black acorns, they're an important food source for a large number of local fauna, from bears to deer to squirrels, as well as a wide range of birds, not only woodpeckers, but birds in the currently, unfortunately, almost unfortunately named corvid family, the stellars and the scrub jays. So these acorns were also, of course, a major food source for indigenous peoples in the area. And the other thing is that there are occasional conifers in the oak woodland. These foothill or gray pines are endemic to California. They occur only here. They germinate only after enough rainfall has fallen and temperatures have been cold enough to guarantee that their seedlings will have enough moisture. How evolved is that? And I mean that literally. Yeah, they grow quickly. And by the way, they have so much sticky resin that it protects them from the bark beetle. So, you know, there they are, surviving. And if you've seen the California buckeye, I just planted one that I got last fall. It's still very small, very, very small, but bigger than it was when I got it. But I live to hope that it's going to get to look like the ones that are down on the South Fork Yuba along the Buttermilk Trail. Pardon me. They grow in areas where they can fill out into the full sun. They probably only go to about 3,000 feet in elevation in our area. But in the late spring, they're absolutely filled with blossoms and with the pollinators that love those blossoms. I mean, they're just a great pollinator tree. And then they go summer deciduous way, way early. So, they have no leaves in the middle of the summer until until the middle of the winter when they start getting their leaves again. But they generally have a really beautiful structure to look at while they're leafless. So plant them where you're going to appreciate that feature. And this oak woodland plant community also has the Western Redbud. Oh, I know. It's the tree after which our chapter is named, but it's also one of my very favorite plants, of my very favorite native plants. It is gorgeous in absolutely every season. It looks beautiful with no leaves. And then the flowers come out and they're magenta. And then it has those beautiful shaped leaves that are green. And then it looks like this in the fall. And meanwhile, many pollinators love this plant. And then it has little seeds that they can eat. So as far as I'm concerned, every community, every yard should have some. And it grows in many of the plant communities. It's a very adaptable plant. Another adaptable plant is the coffeeberry, which springs up easily, grows without much attention paid to it, and provides these wonderful berries for the birds. You can't go wrong. There are several species of coffeeberry here. The common snowberry likes a little bit more water, so I would put it slightly away from the oaks in my experience. These white berries taste, people would never eat them, but I think but the desperate birds seem to enjoy them because they're out in January and February, and when the birds have nothing else, so they love it that we plant it for them. It can grow up, it can be a single shrub, or it can grow up to be a hedgerow if you train it. The white manzanita, this locally manzanita, it produces abundant food for the fauna. Early in the year, these blossoms have nectar that attracts bees and overwintering birds, such as the Anna's hummingbird, which is really lovely to see. And then later, it's bright red berries, which dry on the plant, are a food source for months. So it's lovely, and we see it not only in the oak woodland, but in the oak savanna, the oak chaparral, and the yellow pine forest. Cowscape says it's one of the easiest manzanitas to grow, which is a great thing to know. And also says that it's more tolerant of summer water than other manzanita species. If you want to see this particular manzanita, which I think is totally gorgeous, it's in the Master Gardener Demo Garden. And it's a great example of a manzanita that has been pruned very consistently over the years. So it is not leggy, unlike some of the ones you see in the wild where you go, well, there's nothing until you get to 8 feet. This one is really beautiful. So it's a great example of how beautiful one can look in a landscape. The understory plants in the oak woodland plant community include this deer grass called Muhlenbergia rigens. It is perhaps one of the biggest, if not the biggest, of our local grasses. It is the largest, and it wants to grow in full sun. And so put it in open spots between trees. I've done that, and after a year or two, it doesn't need any supplemental water. It's very happy and only occasionally needs a haircut. It also occurs in yellow pine and riparian plant communities. And by the way, it's called deer grass, not because they browse it, which they don't, but I've heard that it's called that because deer occasionally lie down in it, though I have never experienced that. And I have plenty of deer in my yard. one of the most, these are the two most prominent local irises, the long tube iris on the left and the Hartwig's iris on the right. The long tube iris, it tends more towards local areas, and the Hartwig's iris is a little bit higher, but they do overlap in a couple of places. So, maybe you can put them both in if you love to do that. And you can, use these to get really beautiful color and light in an oak woodland if you get masses of them, which you can do over time. I should do this. So don't give them additional water when they, as is true for for most bulb species, don't give them additional water. We'll talk more about that later. Miner's lettuce. Oh my gosh. It bounds up in the spring, bright green, and then it flowers, and then it dies down as the season turns dry. And then gradually, if it's happy, it will spread. And then this is one of the easiest edible natives to grow. So you just add the greens to a salad until it, gets too flowery, and then you decide not to. The yarrow. Yarrow is a lovely plant. Sorry. Okay. It's bright and sturdy, and it looks good even after it's dried. I mean, it's a wonderful plant. Many butterflies come to this plant. And the only thing that I would warn about this in a garden would be that if you should either be comfortable with it self-seeding and spreading that way, or when it starts to go to seed, cut off the seed heads and then cut off the stalks. And then here are some additional plants for the oak woodland plant community. And I would just recommend that you gauge your selections on the specific habitat where you have more and less light and water and drainage. Just think about that as you're making your selections. The yellow pine forest plant community. The ponderosa pine grows at lower elevations and on south-facing slopes in relatively pure stands. Like that's it, almost all ponderosa pines. But in higher elevations, you're going to find it in more mixed conifer stands. So you'll probably see this as you drive through the counties. But now you'll know what you're seeing. And the other thing to know is, why is this called yellow pine forest? Because ponderosa pines are also called yellow pines. Okay, now I know. Another common plant on the overstory are the incense cedars. We have all seen areas in these counties where, particularly in Nevada County, of course, where the incense cedar grows. And it on the north-facing slopes where it's cooler, less sun. It grows very slowly at first, but boy, then quickly it matures into a very tall tree. It can be 140 to 200 feet high. And as anybody who knows, who's lived on land that's populated by incense cedars, they propagate easily into a very thick forest, unless they're thinned. And that promotes, as we know, tree and forest health. So here is a gorgeous big leaf maple in front of incense cedars. The yellow pine also has, certain deciduous trees, like here, like this. And these these big leaf maples are often, where there's water. We'll get more to that. In the mid-story, there's this lemon Cnose. It's one of our lovely local Cnose. It's so favored by deer, however, that if you want it, you have to protect it from deer somehow or another. But it has gorgeous flowers. And it wants sun. So, put it in a little forest spot that's got some sun. Yeah, maybe not full sun, but a fair amount of sun. It's a great pollinator plant. And according to CNPS, Cnose species generally are host to something like 73 species of butterflies and moths. I don't mean like overall, like if you count up all the species for all the plants. I'm saying in general, any Cnose species has over 70 butterflies and moths to which it is host. The blue elderberry. This elderberry grows in both counties, and it is a wonderful plant for the ecosystem. Its berries provide food to many bird and mammal species. It's prolific in terms of how many berries it provides, if anyone has ever seen them growing. First of all, they grow really tall, really fast if they're in the sun. So they have lots and lots of flowers, which are completely covered with bees. And then the flowers turn into lots and lots of berries. And then in the late summer, the deer may browse the foliage, which I guess becomes less scented. I have found that I need to cage mine in order for it to grow. If I don't cage it, it gets eaten too early, and that's the end of having an elderberry there. Your mileage may vary. It does need some water, so I would definitely plan on that. The Nevada County also is home to the black elderberry, which is Sambucus nigra, and both species thrive in several plant communities. So this is the blue one, but the black one is also available as a local in Nevada County. The Dutchman's pipe, the Aristolochia californica, is a very special vine in the understory of the yellow pine forest. Not just because it has these weird flowers, which it does, but also because it's the host plant for the pipevine swallowtail butterfly. It lays its eggs only on this plant, which is what happens with host plants, but so that those charming caterpillars you see off to the right can pop out and enjoy that soul food that they can eat to survive, the leaves of this species. I mean, look, it's like weird flowers, weird caterpillars. What's not to love? I so far have not succeeded. I have managed to kill this twice from failing to give it enough water through my own failings, but I'm going to try again. The yellow pine forest is home to the Foothill penstemon, and this just pops up in the forest, and it's absolutely totally gorgeous. It has abundant spring blossoms, and yes, it's easier sometimes to find the cultivar Margarita back of porch, than the straight species. We'll talk about that later, but find the straight species if you can. If not, we'll talk about them. Anyway, unsurprising, it's tubular flowers. What do they attract? Hummingbirds, and also bees and other insects, including numerous species of butterflies and moths. I see them all over. And it's a really easy plant to grow. And it's also native to our oak savannas and our oak woodlands. So enjoy. Oh, yes. Okay. These are globe lilies. These are Calochortus is the genus, the white globe lily, the Calochortus albus, the yellow star tulip, and the pink one is the superb Mariposa lily. These are, our counties have a combined total of 7 Calochortus species. They all like partially shaded banks and slopes with good drainage. These Calochortus species are just totally gorgeous. They can be a little bit tricky to get them started. So, you might not want these as your very first natives, give them a try. They also live in chaparral and oak woodland plant communities. So here are a couple of several other of the plants that grow in the yellow pine forest plant community. And as you could see with the miner's lettuce, which we displayed as part of the oak woodland plant community, many species fit well into more than one plant community. And so that makes them great to plant at the edges, where if you have 2 plant communities that meet, plant plants that grow in both plant communities, and you're more likely to have success and to have greater biodiversity. So now to the Foothill Riparian plant community. Okay, the big leaf maple is a great plant. The Foothill Riparian plant communities, they border year-round streams and springs and seeps, and that provides them with the water that they need, of course. So 5 years ago, I did plant one in my lawn, slightly upslope for where I think an old gravel driveway slows water drainage, and the maple tree has done really well so far. So over time, I'd like to expand on the riparian habitat and plant community nearby. We'll see what happens. Okay, the mountain alder is another Foothill riparian plant community. It grows, it's much more common in our counties. There is a mountain alder that grows only above 3,600 feet. The alders have a lot of ecosystem benefits. They fix nitrogen in their roots, so improving the soil for other species in the communities, as we talked about. The white alder grows really fast, which a lot of people do like. And the western swallowtail butterfly loves the leaves. And they also help to stabilize stream banks to prevent high water from taking the soil away. And so people who live in those kinds of environments might also favor them. And here, the Pacific dogwood, what a gorgeous plant. We have several dogwood that are native to our riparian areas, depending on where you live, and they're all very attractive in their own ways. They all like dappled sun. This Pacific dogwood is more tolerant of less water than the other local species, and it's sometimes found growing well away from streams and rivers, even in yellow pine forests. So some refer to this type of setting as upland riparian. So once established in a natural location, the Pacific dogwood should be able to fend for itself. In the mid-story, you can find, in the Foothill riparian, you can find the mock orange. Oh, and I'll tell you, the flowers on this plant are truly as gorgeous as they look. It makes a lovely landscape plant. It has a lovely scent. With plentiful water, it grows quickly and up to 6 feet or so by 9 feet, 6 feet wide, 9 feet high, just gorgeous. With less water, it still succeeds, and though it grows a little more slowly and remains smaller. And the leaves, they turn yellow in the fall. It's a lovely fall plant too. This Western spice bush has a lovely scent. The flowers are as glorious as they look. They're big. They're like at least 4 inches across. And they do smell like an Eastern spice, lovely. When it's part of a Foothill riparian plant community with lots of water, it grows quickly. Pardon me. It's evergreen, it's tougher than it looks. And though it's a streamside plant by nature, it tolerates some dryness, though it still does best in a partial shade area, particularly if it's planted outside of a riparian habitat. So, but you can see it grows to be quite a lovely shrub. The scarlet monkey flower is easy to succeed with in the garden as long as it gets regular water. And you can see that this is a hummingbird favorite. There it is, a place for that hummingbird to put that lovely little beak. Okay, it likes loamy, decently draining soil. What a surprise, because it's riparian. And here, this blue-eyed grass, oh, so adaptable. It's a little easy corn for the Foothill riparian plant community, usually easy to find in nature. It also works in the oak woodland. It likes loamy soil and it likes some moisture. It's usually about 8 to 10 inches tall when it's in bloom, and it blooms for a really long time. The Foothill riparian plant community is where you can put the local ferns, okay, where you have water constantly available and the sun is dappled maybe. So take advantage of this. That chain fern is evergreen, it's a plus, and it gives a nice sense of cool. And the maidenhair fern often grows on steep and rocky slopes. So, you know, some ferns, they disappear in the summer, but they'll return once the wet season begins again. And then there's the purple trillium, or the giant wake robin. Okay, this looks so riparian. It grows in shady places that are damp in the spring. Okay, they do grow slowly, so you know, just be patient. Put them only someplace where you can afford to be patient. There's also a white variety, so you could also think about that. And here are some other plants in that community. Here are some other local plant communities, though they are less common. The Valley Grasslands, the Gabbro Serpentine, the Vernal Pools, and montane communities like Chaparral Lake and Meadow. You can find out more about those in our Redbud books. So, designing with native plants. Just as no two gardeners are alike, no two of our gardens are completely alike. And design is the way that we make our gardens reflect what we know and what we want our landscape spaces to reflect. Okay, and no two gardens are going to have the same effect on the ecosystem. So, what are the design elements that we take into account when we're designing with natives? Okay, we take advantage of the habitat in the native plant community. So we're going to do that. We determine the natural habitat. We build our plant list informed by the corresponding plant communities. We've talked about those plant communities, and I could do an entire presentation on building plant lists, highlighting using calscape.org. But you can also use my list, local plants for local plant communities, and that'll give you a start as well. And there are references on the resources list to other ways, including looking on our new Redbud website. Okay, so I think we're kind of running a little short on time, so I'm going to skip this thing about, you know, why might you use a plant community in your native gardening? I'm going to skip this. I'd love to do it, but I think we should move on. Okay, so why design using native plant communities? Okay, here are some ways. Okay, some reasons. Because it's easier to meet the plant needs, because the plant species support one another, they support the wildlife, foster diversity, natural beauty. We know these. Okay, favor local natives. Okay, Calscape is a way to do this. Pardon me. Okay. So they co-evolved with the fauna. So why locally native plants matter? This is important, and I want to spend a moment on this. Okay, why do you not simply use native plants that fit the plant community? It's like, okay, so, you know, I did this at first. I figured that any yellow pine forest plant would be a good fit for where I live. Eventually, I realized that the ecological as well as horticultural disadvantages for selecting yellow pine forest plants that were from the coast or from Southern California, yeah, you know, it just wasn't as good as the local ones for ecological reasons, because the local fauna survive best with the local native plants. That includes the microbiota, the insects, the birds, the amphibians, the mammals, they all survive better. Also, for instance, another reason is the genetics. The genetics of the local plants are closest to the plants that are in the surrounding wildlands, you know, around where we live. So if you live on the wildland interface, using local native plant species keeps the gene pool local and more adaptive. Cultivars often fit nicely in town and suburban gardens as they are selected for garden use. So it depends on where you live, how much you need to pay attention to this. Just a thought. Okay, what's another design element for natives? Including all those vertical layers, okay? So in a natural plant community, each layer supports the others and helps them thrive. The understory is shaded by the midstory. The overstory, or the canopy, if it's deciduous, it has leaves that break down into humus, enriching the soil for the other layers. And the understory, it cools the roots of the midstory and the overstory. They all work together. So, you know, not only that, but aesthetically, of course, it looks lovely. So the meeting of the layers, it simulates the edge ecosystem, which is the most productive for most wildlife. So where two layers meet is like where two plant communities meet, where two habitats meet. So including more layers supports more biodiversity. Use masses. So what does that mean? It means large amounts of one species. Insects and pollinators are more likely to notice a plant and use it. Nancy Gilbert, our resident bee expert, notes that smaller native bee species don't travel very far from their nests. So they look for a big patch of a useful native species nearby. So let's give it to them. A big patch is also easier for fauna to use as a cover. So let's give them what they need. Okay, one thing to do when we design for natives is to look for year-round bloom. Okay, this is just an example. Okay, 3 of these are from my garden and the 4th is from Nancy's, but I have that plant in my yard. I just don't have as gorgeous a picture. So in spring, there's the yellow star tulip and the lemon ceanothus. In the summer, the sulfur buckwheat. In the fall, the coyote brush. And in the winter, the white leaf manzanita. You know, not every part of my yard is blooming all the time, but something is blooming all the time. Plant for diversity. So, you know, here are several popular local chaparral and oak savanna natives together. You know, plant a greater number of species. You're going to get more biomass. You're going to get the dominant species are going to shift over time. You're going to get, you know, more of real nature this way. You know, you're going to let it do its work. And pay attention to the edges. This is where your landscape has or could have 2 plant communities that come in contact. Here are forest and grassland coming into contact. It could be forest clearing and meadow edges. It could be where an oak woodland meets a riparian area. Allow for and foster these edges where appropriate. In nature, these are places that often support a higher density of plant species. So plant and plan accordingly. You know, try planting, as I said, plants that grow in both plant communities. Mulch for habitat. So here's an interesting thing that I learned. Okay, so in the forest plant communities, allow plants to have their natural mulch of 1 or 2 inches of shed leaves wherever possible, you know, if it's not a fire issue, right? Okay. If it's not possible to leave that, then forest plants do well with wood-based mulch, such as fir bark or wood chips, but no more than 2 to 3 inches of some light material. Plants that are native to drier environments, such as chaparral, this is favor mulch that's like the top layers of their traditional habitat, which is rocky. So mulching with rocks and pebbles lowers their risk for crown rot, and the lighter colored rocks reflects the heat better. So use the light colors to reflect the heat and use the smaller pebbles for smaller plants. I have really enjoyed moving to this approach to mulching in chaparral. And I think my plants have as well. And avoid placing the mulch directly over the interior half of the root ball. It helps so that plants can breathe. And be sure to leave some ground bare in your yard so that ground nesting bees have a place to make their homes. Yes, design so that you have some hidden spots for brush, so that in some hidden spots you have brush and logs. That means you don't have to put these out where anybody else is going to see them, but in some hidden corner of your property, if you have enough property, of course, you know, put some places where you can have a brush pile or 2 that provides habitat for insects, birds, and amphibians, so they can hide and make nests and shelter in there. Yeah. And design beyond the 30-foot zone, beyond, 30 feet from your house. Locate plants so that when they're mature, their outermost branches are going to touch. That shade is going to lower soil temperatures, which in our current environment, we're really going to want. It also is that's going to foster mycorrhizal growth. It's going to improve soil quality. It's going to increase the root systems, and it's going to increase underground moisture exchange between those plants. Those plants are going to really know that they're part of the same plant community. I didn't know this when I planted. Now I have to go plant some more plants. So we're closing in on it here. Planting and establishing natives. So beyond, okay, okay. So here, it's a lovely little butterfly that couldn't even wait till after the plant sale, okay? This is at our plant sale. We already have butterflies on our native plants, okay? So when do we plant natives? We have always heard, I think, that late fall is generally best. You know, usually it's like after the second rain, you know, after we start feeling like, okay, we're really going to start to have rains now. Okay, that's generally best. But if we're planting riparian species that we're going to water regularly, even after we plant them, we can plant them anytime. And one thing about that is that some of those riparian species look like sticks in October. So planting them when we can, so buying them to plant when we can still see what they look like is sometimes advantageous. So that's a good reason to do that. But one reason to plant in the fall is that in the fall, rather than planting in winter, it's still warm enough that they can develop their root system during the rainy season, but it's not so cold as in the winter when plants are probably not growing very much anyway. Okay, so what's different about planting natives? Okay, many of them are quite sensitive to the crown height at which they're planted, to the planting height. So get that crown a little bit above the soil level once the soil is tamped in. So that may mean, you know, you're going to have to do a little bit of juggling there, you know, how much soil are you mounding up at the bottom before you put the plant in? Oh, that's not quite enough. Oh, I have to do a little bit more. Make sure you get this right. It makes all the difference in that plant's success. You don't want it too high, but you don't want it too low. Yes, this can be tedious, but it's so worth it. So 1/2 inch above the soil level once the soil is tamped in. And then soak that plant well. That's not with something, not with a hard spray, but with a soft soak, and really, really soak it. This is the longest soak that plant will have in its entire life issued by a human being. So soak that plant well. Okay, so how do you water them? With new plants, you can use drip irrigation and a variety of ways. We're not going to talk about irrigation today, except use overhead for grasslands and meadows, and water, you know, approximately bi-weekly until it rains for those new plants. The first year, keep those root balls moist for the first 3 months. If the rains stop, you go back to watering. If they're low water plants, water them at least every week for the first year. If they're regular water plants, water them twice a week. And the bulbs, you know, for most of them, you stop watering them. You don't give them any water. You stop watering them when the leaves start to yellow and let them go completely dormant. Only a few species like leopard lily and camassia, they do like some summer moisture. Now, there are a few species like Freeman and a few other drought-adapted species that need a very specific water regimen, which is they need water nearby that it can reach its roots to, like I discovered a lawn or an actual stream, or you know, some a planting area where other plants are getting a lot of water, but it isn't provided. The soil directly below that Freeman doesn't have water. Pardon me, I was just looking at deer outside my yard, in my yard. So those free-mounted dendron need to be able to reach their roots to that water. So that makes it challenging to establish those free-mounted dendron. That's why people lose so many when they're young, because how do you water them before their roots are long enough to reach that water source? So you try to mimic this by supplying water just close enough that the roots can reach, and do it infrequently to encourage the root growth, and periodically move that infrequent water source farther away until those roots of that free-mounted dendron have reached their ultimate water source. Okay, the second year, low water plants, water them every other week. Regular water plants, once a week, deeply. Mature plants, drought adapted plants, no water. Low water plants, occasionally as needed. Regular water, once a week, deeply. And if you're expecting a heat wave, you water 3 to 4 days before the heat wave, so that the plants don't have their roots in hot, wet soil, which they won't like. Okay, so here we are. Growing a natural habitat garden is also one of the most important things each of us can do to help restore a little order to a disordered world. I feel like we need that more than ever. So that's all I have, and I am ready for questions.
Thank you, Chrissy. Go ahead and type your questions into the chat, and Chrissy's ready to answer. Thank you.
Okay, so Amanda, you've asked, could you give some advice or strategy as to how to incorporate natives into urban landscapes? It seems hard to balance the public's need for safety, cleanliness, and pretty year-round tidiness, etc., with the beauty and positive aspects of free-flowing native gardens, particularly in small areas. Okay, well, I'm hearing what you're saying. What I'm interpreting what you're saying as to, it sounds like you're talking about public urban landscapes. So I don't have any particular experience with that, but I think that there are certain. I think that the demo garden has at the Master Gardeners has some good examples of that, and say for instance that that Arctostaphylos viscida looks good all year round, and a number of the Cnose look good all year round. And I think that the Redbud looks good all year round as well. I know that, for instance, the Roseville, one of the Roseville public libraries that I go to from time to time has an Eastern Redbud, and that has a series of Eastern Redbuds, and I thought to myself, why did they put in the Eastern Redbud? Not that I don't like it, but my thought is they could have put in the Western Redbud and it would have looked equally beautiful. Those are just some starters. I think the idea is, to start with some of the foundation plants. And I also think that they should do some thinking about having an area where some of the where when they do some of the plants that are replaced frequently for color, that they could do some of that using California natives, that like the mule's ears and other plants that have wonderful, and the Chilean aster, other local California natives that flower prolifically. So those are just some thoughts. So what sort of advice would you give a city planner or park and rec group about incorporating native plants? Oh, that's a wonderful question. I think, Michelle, probably the best way for us to think about that one might be for you to contact us and we could give you some specific advice about that, because we would really love to, because we have been starting to work with our Nevada County cities and county about some landscape standards for the county and for developers. And I think some of those might be very helpful for you. Okay, how best to stop insects eating Western redbud leaves? Oh, well, that's an interesting question, Charlene. The short answer would be, it depends, which is a master gardener answer. And if the, yes, exactly, moderated for everyone. Actually, to a certain extent, it's a good thing when insects eat Western redbud leaves. Yes, exactly. If the insects are not going to kill the Western redbud, then I would say, I think we can let them do some eating. And when you say that's enough, then you can wash them off. Let them have some and you have some, and strike a balance. But if they are teeny redbuds and you think, wow, I don't think these redbuds are going to stand a chance if these insects are eating my tiny redbuds, then I would wash them off earlier. Yes. 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 Charlene says, Teresa said, yes, it's probably leafcutter bees. Yes. Oh, and as Teresa says, TC says, they're using the cuts as lining in their nests. Let's see, what else we have here? Oh, what about Rudbeckia? I planted a lot this spring and something is eating them up. The wild turkeys? I wanted something for cut flowers too. Well, I think you've hit on the Rudbeckia is not a local native, but it is a beautiful native. So I can understand wanting to have it in your yard, and I can understand being frustrated that something is eating it up. So the first thing that I would do is, for next time, of course, is to try to protect, as soon as you notice that something is getting at them, would be to try to protect them. And of course, if you think it's the turkeys, you would have to protect them from above as well as from around, because of course the turkeys could just hop over some fence. But they're unlikely. If you do something that's high and you use deer fencing, I use the 8-foot deer fencing around our vegetable garden, and I've never had a turkey in there. We have lots of turkeys around, and you might even be able to get away with 6-foot deer fencing, and the turkeys wouldn't get in. And the deer fencing it verges on invisible from a distance. I've put in 60 feet of it to keep deer away from a riparian area that I put in recently.
Chrissy.
Yes.
Chrissy, Dean, the moderator, and you didn't see a question earlier, I don't think, about gophers, which is sort of related to the turkey question.
Yes. Okay. Gophers. What to do about gophers?
That's from Leland Hall.
Okay. I think gophers are one of the more frustrating aspects of life in the country in the foothills. So I empathize with you, and I first I will tell you that there is. I can tell you to go to, if you want the full answer, to go to a website run by the University of California. It's the Integrated Pest Management, ucipm.edu, something like that. I'm sorry that I don't have the exact, but if you go Integrated Pest Management, University of California, you will find it, and then put gophers in the search bar, and you will find their science-based responses to all of the ways that you can handle gophers. And I can now tell you, since I'm not right now wearing my Master Gardener hat, I can tell you some of the things that we have done at our place to somewhat retard gophers. The best thing to do, and this is on the UC A&R site, is to use a gopher basket for each plant. And it's made of a wire mesh. And you plant each plant in a wire mesh. And that protects the roots of the plant. And that keeps the gophers from eating them. And there are various places you can buy them, either in 3-packs or 5-packs or individually, depending on the size of the plant, whether it's a tree or it's a little shrub. Definitely do bulbs, everything, but they don't like daffodils. They do like most other bulbs. They like fruit trees. We line all of our vegetable beds. I realize this is not a vegetable course, but we line all of our vegetable beds with hardware cloth, which is not really cloth. It's really small wire. Yes. Oh yeah, some of you small wire garbage baskets from the dollar store. Yeah, I used a small wire garbage basket, and I stick those over my plants and use garden staples to protect the small plants from deer. They really do cost $1 at the dollar store, and they're very useful while the plants are small. We also put, when we find a gopher hole or a place where gophers have been, we dig up the opening and we pour cayenne pepper down the hole. We've also poured urine down the holes. You can use have-a-heart traps, but I don't see how that really solves the problem because there are way more gophers out there than there are places to deal with them. So yeah, I would recommend against using poison because we like our owls, and the owls will control gophers. So encouraging owls is a great way to discourage gophers. So keep your oak trees and your other trees as healthy as possible to encourage the owls. There are other questions out there? Oh, they're degradable gopher baskets. That's great. Somebody says that the gopher baskets girdle roots. That's an interesting thought. I have not personally had that experience, but that doesn't mean that comment is wrong. I just may not have experienced that. Oh, when you put the deer fencing in to protect the riparian plantings, do I foresee the fencing being temporary? When would it be okay to remove? Oh, such an interesting question. The short answer is that I don't know. I would love to think that I could take it off, but I'm afraid that the deer are, I think I'd have to establish something for the deer to eat, something that I'm comfortable with the deer browsing, give them more browse material before I could take the fencing down. I'm not sure what that would be, but I think I'd need to establish that. Because otherwise I think they'd take too much of it. Well, thank you for putting up the use. So, Michelle put up the UC A&R gopher card. So the link is there. And Peggy put up the UC A&R. Okay, I can see that there are master gardeners in the group here. Thank you, everyone. Oh, yes. And as someone says, please keep brush piles away from overstory trees and shrubs for fire safety. Yes, let's make sure. I didn't mention that, but that is, of course, an important thing. because as things dry out in the brush pile, they do become, easier to set alight. Okay. Any other questions?
So, Chrissy, there was one about transplanting plants that are farther from the home in the garden that they would like to have closer to their home. And it's sort of, there are two aspects to that question. One is, what's the best time to transplant them and how to do it? And then there's another question is, we need to be careful about transplanting the larger or more flammable natives closer to our house. We want to reestablish the fire distance. So if you could address that.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Okay. So in terms of when is the best time to transplant a plant? So if you have a plant that, if you're talking about plants that go dormant, that lose their leaves, the best time to transplant that plant would be when it is dormant, when the soil is damp but not soaking wet. Because when the soil is really wet, then when we work the soil to do the transplant, that soil will become compacted. And that then means that the soil will not be able to hold as much, it will be less aerated, and that will be very detrimental to the roots. So we want to only transplant plants. And if we transplant the plant when the soil is completely dry, we're creating so much work for ourselves. Plus, the roots will be very stressed in terms of, will be more likely to break roots, and will be transplanting the plant into an area where the soil is naturally drier. So we want to transplant the plant when it's dormant and after there's been some rain, but not when it's super wet. And ideally, I would do that on the earlier side of the season to do that rather than the later side. Because, so say I would do that in, say, the December period rather than the February period. And why would I do that? I would do that because if I do it in the December period, that plant will have from December to February to adjust to its new place and be stronger when it goes through that, the rest of the year than if I transplanted it only in February. So that's my thought. I don't know if I'd get to that, but that would be what I would try. Oh, Grace, thank you for the recommendation. Grace says, deer like mule fat, a baccharis. So that's a really nice thing. And yes, as the moderator said, it depends on the plant when it's best to transplant them. So if it's a plant that's coming into, on the other hand, say if it's a plant that's coming into bloom in February, like a currant, like a ribes, that would not be the best time to transplant it. I might transplant that one, after it's bloomed. So, in the early spring or in the mid-spring after it's bloomed, I would transplant that one. Or you could transplant that one. You transplant that one now? I mean, it's pretty dormant right now, so you could transplant that one probably now if you have that kind of a plant. So, it really depends on the plant. But, in general, I would say that December time period, depending on what you have. When Jenny asks, is there information on a website? What kind of information are you looking for? Information on transplanting or what? If you could help us, we can help you. Are you looking on information about transplanting when you're asking that question? Jenny?
Jenny says, yes, when to transplant spring flowers. But Are you talking annuals, Jenny? Or perennials? Because if they're perennials, the rules apply about transplanting them, as Chrissy says, transplanting them mostly in fall. If they're annuals, Peggy's advice to call the Master Gardener hotline is great.
I think if they're annuals, it would be lovely to look up how to gather their seed, and how to plant their seed, and to start their seed, to let them bloom in the place where they are this next year, and then gather their seed and plant their seed in the new place where you want them to be. You could try transplanting some of them, but you're probably more likely to have success if you sprinkle their seed in the new place. But it's wonderful. You are so fortunate to have them on your property. Wow, I envy you. Oh, the Master Gardener hotline in Nevada County is currently closed because of COVID. But if you go to their website, if you just put Nevada County Master Gardeners into your browser, you will find it. When you go to their website, there is on the left side something that I think says "Got questions," but I could be wrong about exactly what it says. And you can fill out a little form and ask a question, and they will get back to you. Okay, same for Placer County. Yeah. If somebody who is a Nevada County Master Gardener, I think it's the same thing. I think it's NCMGUCANR. I can't look it up right now, but if somebody who is yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? And I want, for those who know and those who don't know, we're now showing a picture of Chet Blackburn's pond. And I mentioned that it's Chet's pond because Chet was one of the founders of the Redbud chapter. And for many years, he was a driving force, if not the driving force, behind the Redbud plant sale. He was a driving force behind the creation of Redbud's 2 books. Quite an amazing, amazing human being. And he passed away just in the last year. And I'm so grateful to Nancy for having supplied this photograph and many of the photographs that were in this talk. And thank you so very much. So we think that's all, Jean?
All right. So thank you, Chrissy. Thanks all. And you got several email addresses in the chat that you can use to contact for more information. I mentioned our native plant help at redbud-cmps.org to get individualized advice. And there also is the Redbud Forum on Facebook. Chrissy, you've just shared so much wonderful information. We really appreciate you. Thank you again.
You're so welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye, all.